Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this very special webinar entitled Plural Values and Shared Futures, Indigenous and Faith Contributions to the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is Gopal Patel. I'm honored to moderate the discussion today. And the event today has been co-organized between the Faith for Earth Coalition at the UN Environment Programme and Faiths for Biodiversity. We have a packed agenda with many wonderful speakers, so please get yourselves comfortable for the next 90 minutes, get yourself some water, some fruit, whatever you need for this really fascinating conversation and discussion that we'll be having today. I'm delighted to hand over to our first speaker today, who is Dr. Iyad Abu-Mogli, the founder and director of the Faith for Earth Coalition. Dr. Iyad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gopal, and good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody, dear friends and colleagues. It's really an honor to join you today for the opening of this important dialogue held actually on for the great significance of the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. This is indeed not just a commemorative day, it's a call to remembrance and a call to respect and to action. This day argues to, urges us to recognize and uplift the knowledge, systems and values and rights of Indigenous people. Indigenous people are communities who have lived in deep harmony with nature for generations and whose very ways of life offer indispensable guidance for the environmental challenges that we are facing today. So today's dialogue is actually framed around a profound opportunity, which is to bring together the moral and spiritual voices of faith communities with the experiential wisdom of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And the purpose is to reimagine our collective relationship with nature. And this comes as part of our efforts to contribute to the implementation of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. But such a framework can only succeed if it is built upon the full range of values that people assign to nature, not only economic or instrumental values, but also spiritual, relational, and cultural ones. The EBIS value assessment, which stimulates our gathering today, reminds us that the dominant worldview that treats nature as a commodity to be extracted and traded has played a major role in driving the biodiversity crisis we face today. In contrast, Indigenous peoples see nature as kin, as sacred, as alive. Likewise, across the world's religions, we find teachings that elevate our responsibilities toward creation, not as owners, but as stewards. Faith traditions have always shaped how we see the world and our place within it. They frame our values, inform our ethics, and move our communities toward collective action. From the Quranic concept of al-mizan, the balance in all creation, to the biblical notion of stewardship, to the teachings of the compassion in Buddhism, and the emphasis on interdependence in many indigenous cosmologies, we see a convergence of wisdom that places care for the earth at the heart of the sacred. And we must be clear, this is not just a moral imperative, it is also a political and governance challenge. The Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, with its emphasis on equity, rights-based approaches, and inclusive governance, provides the structure. But it is faith-based organizations and Indigenous peoples who bring the heart, the values, relationships, and worldviews that can make the structure meaningful and durable. Last year's historic decision at CBD COP16, some of you were there, to establish a permanent subsidiary body for indigenous peoples and local communities under Article 8J, that makes a major step forward in integrating these voices into global biodiversity governance. But this must be just the beginning. It's not the end, it's not the goal. The road to CBD COP17, however, in 2026 must be paved with authentic collaboration, co-creation, and respect. This dialogue is a step on that road, and we are gathered here not simply to speak, but to listen across cultures and traditions and spiritual lineages. The draft statement that we will begin to shape together is more than a declaration. It is an offering. It is an act of shared commitment that draws from the deepest sources of meaning in our respective traditions. The transformation we seek cannot be achieved by policy alone. We need a shift in consciousness, a shift in values, a recognition that the future of biodiversity is not just a scientific or economic matter, it is a spiritual and cultural choice. We need to work together with faith leaders, indigenous elders, youth, policymakers, and activists as we forge pathways towards a future where all life is honored and where the multilateral system truly reflects the pluralism of our planet. I hope today's dialogue plants sustainable seeds that will grow into sustained collaboration, ethical leadership, and shared action for biodiversity and justice now and for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iyad, for your opening words and remarks and really setting the stage for why we are gathered here today. Thank you so much. Next, we have Reverend Faye Tevi, but I just want to check with my team to see if he's here. If he's not, we'll move on. He may be having some connection issues, so we'll move on. And then once he joins, we can revert back to Reverend Faye. So then next, I'd like to move on to there are four sessions in the program today, focusing on the IPBES values assessment, Article 8J, bringing faith values into decision making, and then a session in the breakout where we will discuss how we can integrate faith and Indigenous values into the implementation of the GBF. And we have wonderful speakers for each of these sessions. So if we dive into session one, focus on the IPBES values assessment, which is a foundational report that I'm sure many of us are aware of, and which has inspired this dialogue and is serving as a common thread for our discussions today. I'd like to hand over to very dear friend and colleague Azmira Alibai, who's the Faith and Ecosystems Coordinator at the Faith for Earth Coalition. Azmira, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gopal, and it's lovely to be here with everybody today. Dr. Iyad, in his opening remarks, mentioned the values assessment, and I do hope that many of you have had a chance to interact with it. If not, allow me to present to you a very short description of what this assessment is. In 2022, IPBES, which is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, established in 2012, it's very similar to the IPCC, but geared towards biodiversity. Published a landmark report, and you can see that on your screen, on diverse values and valuation of nature, and we simply refer to that as the values assessment. Today in our dialogue, we center the values assessment as it's one of the key resources for the Article 8J working group under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And I'll provide you with a very brief overview of the values assessment. Now, we are aware of how political and economic decisions tend to overlook nature, conservation, and the protection of our common home. And the value assessment, therefore, calls for a system-wide transformation or transformative change that better reflects the plural values of nature and aligns them with justice and sustainability. It places at the center values and community-based approaches like those of Indigenous peoples as right holders. The problem with how nature is currently valued has also been outlined by the values assessment. We know that decision makers often rely on a narrow set of values like short-term profit, GDP, which is contrary to, for example, the quality of life, overlooking many ways that people depend on nature to be specific. But as we know, Indigenous and local worldviews are often ignored in policy, and there is a huge call for greater integration. To address this, the assessment proposes a typology of nature's values, which includes worldviews and knowledge systems, broad values, and this includes moral principles like justice, harmony with nature, specific values that includes judgments regarding the importance of nature in particular contexts, instrumental, intrinsic, and relational values, and indicators used to measure them, like biophysical, monetary, or socio-cultural metrics. And this typology helps us to capture the diversity of people's relationships with nature. Transformative change means a shift in the underlying values that guide our society. And we need, for example, to redefine what we mean by development or good quality of life. And what this means is that it really needs to be reflective of values like responsibility, care for the earth, stewardship, and interdependence. I'll conclude. The values assessment is therefore a call to action. It helps us to redefine and reframe, assess, and prioritize nature conservation in policy, practice, and to build decision-making systems that recognize plural worldviews and knowledge systems, especially those of Indigenous peoples, of local communities, and of faith communities. Please keep in mind that the 27th meeting of the subsidiary body on scientific and technical knowledge, technical and technological advice, Substa 27, will be held from the 20th to the 24th of October. And it's back to back with the first meeting of the subsidiary body on Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention on Biological Diversity related to Indigenous people and local communities from the 27th to the 30th of October. And this will be hosted by the government of Panama. So this conversation is a precursor to the upcoming meetings in October. And we hope that colleagues and friends who are able to make it to those meetings will continue to work closely with like-minded groups and organizations. And with that, over to you, Gopal.
Thank you so much, Ismaira, for kind of setting that foundation for understanding the values assessment. And I'm just wondering if it could be put in the chat, the link, so folks can download it as we're going through the dialogue today. I'm delighted next to invite Dr. Maria Elena Huambachano, who is the Associate Professor at Syracuse University in Environmental Humanities and Indigenous Studies. Dr. Maria Elena was one of the lead authors of the Values Assessment and currently serves on the Indigenous and Local Knowledge Task Force of UNESCO. Dr. Maria Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I am Cho Tenakotokotao, greetings from my homeland of Peru, where I'm currently at. And also, I would like to acknowledge all the work that you guys have put into this presentation. I am an Indigenous scholar native of Peru who has a strong relationship with Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also with in Turtle Island, North America, where I've been based for the past 7 years. And all this work, drawing from my personal work, and also all this research, spending over 15 years working with many Indigenous communities, it became very, very, not just real, but very valuable, the role of Indigenous peoples and addressing global issues, for instance, climate change and food security. However, the knowledge of Indigenous people is often overlooked. So this is why it's important that my work and the work of other Indigenous scholars and allies in providing research-based evidence of the millennia-old knowledge of many Indigenous communities. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about Indigenous philosophies of well-being and the values underpinning those philosophies, which I believe will add to this conversation. Indigenous peoples around the world, from every single continent of the world, from the North America, South America, Europe, Africa, they are the architects of sustainable good living. They are the architects of good living philosophies. Specifically, I'm going to be talking briefly about the good living philosophy of my people, the Quechua in South America, with the concept of ayin cause, which means good life, prosperous life. Also in Aotearoa, New Zealand, there is no specific or unique concept comparable to the Peruvian setting, but the closest is Maori Ora, the same, focused on achieving a good life. There are other concepts, for instance, in North America, Mino Vida Wisdom, the good life. Sumankamanya in South America, the famous Suma Cause that has been discussed especially in development studies. But all these philosophies of living well, which of course is place-based and all the knowledge, it's context specific, they all hold key values, belief systems. Underpinning all these philosophies are very specific values, which is linked to the plural values, and also very much so linked to the intrinsic values, because they don't actually go, they go beyond the economic system to think more about the non-human quality of life. It focuses on a very indigenous philosophy of life in which the human and non-human work together and have responsibilities to preserve, nourish one another. When it comes to the main values underpinning ayin cause, the indigenous good living philosophy of Quechua people, there are a few that I would like to mention. For instance, the key concept of aini, reciprocity. It's just that you only take what is needed, and it's very much used in environmental policy. In Aotearoa, we have the concept of Tinoranga Tiratanga, self-determination and autonomy. There are other concepts, for instance, that Maori use in environmental policy. For instance, the concept of rahui. Rahui is imposed on an area, for instance, on a river, where you know, because you grow food and live life according to the seasons, they know that they can't go and catch in a very specific area because they know that the population in the area, the fish population, needs to have a rest. The other concepts, the concept of aini, which is very much upheld in the highlands of Peru. Aini goes beyond reciprocity. It's more about preserving the sanctity, preserving the dignity of our non-human relatives. All these plural values highlight that it's not just the benefit and the well-being of humans, but the well-being of the non-humans. And I think that's very important, that when it's linked to the Canning Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, when we center Mother Earth, or Pachamama and Quechua and Papatunuk and Maori, we center the importance of Pachamama at the heart of these philosophies of well-being, because we need to respect, nourish, and preserve her in order for us to have a good living. There are other concepts that I would like to mention here. For instance, a key concept that's often overlooked is about the kinship-centric approach that exists between how you interact and relate to nature. When I was part of the values assessment report it was very interesting to be in conversations with many researchers. It was a very small, it's a handful number of Indigenous scholars. So it actually helped us to have a very enriching conversations. And drawing from my experience, I think the understanding of Indigenous worldviews, which is holistic in nature, understanding of Indigenous philosophies of well-being is not understood. So what I would like to ask in this dialogue is to have a discussion about to have a clear understanding about Indigenous worldviews and Indigenous philosophies of well-being, which again is context specific. For instance, in my work, I compare the philosophies of well-being in Maori and Quechua and while they share similarities and the worldviews, they're very unique because Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge is based on every single geographic area. And that's the beauty of that, because then we know different methods to monitor biodiversity. We understand about the many varieties of crops. We understand about when we're facing issues of climate change. So every single typology, every single area, every single knowledge that we have will provide us with natural indicators and provide us with the knowledge to be able to tackle key challenges. But to do that, we need to also respect such knowledge, so respect, recognize, and understand the value of Indigenous worldviews and Indigenous philosophies of well-being. That, as I said, they are embedded in every single Indigenous culture globally. And with that, I would like to end this part of my talk. Thank you. Kia ora sulpaiki.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maria Elena, for all your work that you've done on the values assessment and really kind of not bringing a challenge to us that how can we step forward and step up in this moment with our own faith values and with Indigenous values as well. So thank you so much for your remarks. We're going to move now to our next session, but before we do that, we're trying to make this session as interactive as possible, and we'll have a breakout session towards the end of our time here. But I'm just wondering if folks would like to, in the chat, they're invited to share one word or one phrase that really signifies or kind of epitomizes their relationship with nature. You know, hearing what we just have from Dr. Maria Elena and from the values assessment and from the work we've done, and has been shared today, a real root cause of this crisis is a crisis of relationship and connection. So you're welcome and invited to share a word or phrase in the chat that kind of speaks to you in terms of your relationship and your connection with nature. As you do that, we'll move on to our next speaker. That is my very dear friend, Lucy Malenke. I want to call Lucy a doctor. I don't think she is a doctor, but we'll call her Dr. Lucy Malenke for the purposes of today. She is the co-founder of the Indigenous Women's Biodiversity Network and regional coordinator for Africa within the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity under the Convention of Biological Diversity. Lucy will speak to all of us about the establishment of the subsidiary body for Indigenous peoples and local communities under Article 8J of the CBD, which was mentioned earlier. And she'll also explore how Indigenous and faith actors can collaborate to advance biodiversity governments within the GBF. Lucy, it's such a pleasure to see you again. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bhopal, and thank you all for being here, and also for the presenters that did before me. And I think a lot has really been spoken, and like what Mariana was talking about was really very important. And I think at the same time we had Asmara Alibai really bringing up the ICBES assessment and the opening that was very clear to put about the spirituality and look at Indigenous people and how we look at biodiversity holistically together, and why I think this particular theme that you had and the topic of our discussion is very, very crucial, because for us Indigenous people, everything for us that has life is important, and we look at the biodiversity as holistic. It's something that we all must really look together and protect and be able to work together to make sure that it doesn't disappear, or rather distractions don't continue. And with all the efforts that have been taken place have really been very, very important, despite the fact that it has also been challenging that we continue losing our biodiversity every other day. And so the most important thing is to have this spirit of working together, all of us, and making sure that we bring our values, we bring our own life in with us. And indeed, for Indigenous people, we've been working for such a long time. Since the conventions were put in place in 92, we were there. And even before that, because it's something that is ancestral, that is something that has been there for years. And as you grow up as an Indigenous person, you are always told how nature is important and how you should always continue protecting it. And for us, when we started discussing and really looking at Article 8J and related provisions, we looked at it in a holistic way and trying to see how can the governments also be able to understand and look at, be able to really understand us. And by the time we were talking about Article 8J and other provisions, we kept on thinking that it will be very, very important if we have a body that will be able to really make us more stronger, send our voices, and let these voices and words be respected and be, also recognize and have stronger voices. And that's how we came into seeing how we could come up with a subsidiary body. And it was really interesting that by the time we had the Conference of Parties, the 15th Conference of Parties of the Biological Diversity of the Convention, we were able to have already discussions, very strong discussion with many of our allies. And I think the faith family was also part of us, strongly looking and also trying to talk to governments and others to make sure that we have that particular body. And indeed, it went on very well. We had discussion, it was approved, and then it was taken to COP16, where we had now to discuss together to make sure that we can be able to have this body. But what is also strong about the 15th Conference of Parties is the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is to run from up to 2030 and continuous. And this was very important because it came up with some targets, indicators, and goals to be able to help us to move forward and bring these subsidiary bodies and whatever we recommend. And the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework came up very clearly with goals. And we have goal A, B, and D. And we also have the section where it looks at these goals and targets for 2030. And the first is reducing threats to biodiversity, which was really very clear, and making us really look at all the details in it so that it can help us do our different work and different areas of work, both private, government, and so on. And that was from target 1 to target 8. And for us Indigenous people, we were really very keen to look at target 1, 15. And then later on, there was also this second part where people discussing about meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing, which is very, very important because our resources, we have to really have a benefit sharing. It has to be sustainable, and we have to work collectively together. And that was well discussed in terms of looking at the different targets, which is 9 to 13, because the whole global framework has 23 targets. And of course, we have the last part of it also looking at tools and solutions and implementation of the mainstreaming of the biodiversity, where is target 14 to 23. Why am I bringing that? Because they are related. They are related on how we were to work in different aspects and look at our institutional arrangements on Article 8J and other related provisions, so that when we come with this body, which we are calling it a subsidiary body on 8J, was very, very important for us to see where we fit in. And that's how COP16 came up with really very good recommendation. And we worked so hard to make sure that we have this body. And this body is now going to be placed just next to SAPSTA, which I think, Alibai has mentioned it and said that it's going to be held in October, just back to back with the article, with the subsidiary body on Article 8J and other provisions of the convention, which is very important. And we have also other subsidiary bodies on implementation and, of course, the scientific part of it. And of course, with the CBD, we also have other areas of expert group. But what is very important about this particular of the structure and illustration of the CBD is that it has to put everyone together. And it has really brought very, very clear ways that we can now sit as a body, as Indigenous peoples, with a subsidiary body on Article 8J and other provision, to be also to make our own decision, to discuss among ourselves and to share with the governments and see ourselves having that house, that home, where we can all be recognized and being respected in terms of bringing our issues together. And I think at the beginning, we've also had Dr. Yad when he talked about COP17. This particular discussion that has been taken from COP16 is very crucial because it will take final decisions at COP17, where we'll be able to discuss, and now we'll be discussing as a body, and at the same time where we have subsidiary body on implementation and then SAPSTA. And we had to prepare for this, because if we don't prepare for it, then it will be quite a lot of other tasks. And that was done during COP17. And now I also want to mention about, what are the main things and what are we going to do in that subsidiary body. Definitely we have a new program of work on Article 8J, the provisions of the convention related to Indigenous people and local communities. And we are looking at that particular new program of work as a key important part of the subsidiary body. It has its own objective, which is the implementation of the Convention on Biological Diversity, especially the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. That's where we will be implementing with other key stakeholders, and so that we can work together. And we'll also be looking at our full and effective participation, which is the key thing for that body to be really set in place so that we can be visible. And I think Mariana had also mentioned that despite the really work that is done from the ground with Indigenous peoples, still it's not respected, it's not like really taken into serious issues, but we really wanted to have this body so that people can see the work that we do. The holistic approach, the traditional knowledge should be valued with the same respect related to the knowledge that we have. Ecosystems approach, respect to free and pure informed consent, and also the gender responsive and human rights based approach. And the other elements that are very crucial to us is the conservation and restoration, sustainable use of biological diversity, where it's embedded within the targets which I mentioned earlier, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, and 9. And all this is very crucial, because if we look at this program of work, we kind of look at it bringing to us as what we are discussing today, to have the knowledge and culture really recognize how it's related to the protection of our biodiversity, to the protection and keeping of our values that we have, that we are talking about, and how people can know exactly how Indigenous people really do value this particular thing, particular issues. Strengthening implementation of monitoring progress, full and effective, as I had said, and also the human rights approach. Let's not forget about that. Access, including direct access to funding for Indigenous people, and also looking at how we can restore our biodiversity and also restore our resources that have already been, depleted. And despite the fact that there has been a lot of struggle for Indigenous people globally to keep those resources in place. And as already you have also heard that we are really looking forward. We are excited to have our first meeting. The first meeting will be held in Panama just after the SAPSTA. And the meeting will be a subsidiary body, of course, for Article 8J and other provisions, and will be hosted by the Panama government, which is our first meeting. And this first meeting is very crucial because it will then be able to bring us, quite some issues on the table. There are still some issues left pending. And for us, it's very, very important to be able to work together. This particular meeting we are having today is very crucial because discussing as Indigenous people with you all as key players on issues of biodiversity is very, very important. And let's not forget that even during the COP16, other issues that came up very clearly and very important and that were really discussed during the COP16 were we had the headline indicators on land issues, which is, all of you, when you hear land issues, look at Indigenous people. This is what causes a lot of issues of marginalization and also, of conflict and different. And it was very, very good for us as Indigenous people to look at those headline indicators of target 22.1 being approved at that particular meeting, looking at the status and trends in land use change and land tenure in the traditional territories of Indigenous and local communities. That was a landmark, and we look at it and we have different Indigenous people also really taking up that particular areas in discussing it. The good thing with us, International Indigenous Forum, we work as a family, we work as a unit. So each and every one of us, we really contribute and look at different areas that are very important. For COP16 again, and I'm almost done, is also that I want to highlight that the other important things was that there was a launch of the Kali Fund, which was also very crucial because, as you had me mention, is the issue of having the financial and finances to be able to continue the work that we are doing, and also to be able to have the implementation of the different aspects of the work to implement the global biodiversity framework. And indeed, there is still a lot to be done, but for us Indigenous people, even though we look at what we gain, we still believe that as a team and as a people working together and working with the faith family and also working with others, the private sector, we are looking at the issue of all society, all governments, which is a theme that came out, an issue that came as to guide us, that it's very, very important to look at biodiversity for all of us with life. Anything that has life, as our own cultures and traditions tell us, is important. We breathe the same air. We want to have a clean environment, and we also want to have a sustainable life that we can bring our next generation in a very clear and sustainable environment, and at the same time a clean environment where everybody will be happy. So these are some of the things that I wanted to bring up and say, you cannot work alone. We have to work together, and we can only work by collaborating together and really making sure that we succeed in what we talk today. And we hope to look forward for the, for the outcome of this and the discussions that are going to be discussed here. I can share the presentation later on so that at least people may pick up some few points that are brought up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for your remarks, and really that point at the end around that we have to work together, we have to collaborate, we have to partner for this work, and we are so grateful for you and the networks that you represent for the work we've done together over a number of years. And Article 8J was such a monumental moment, and know that it was a result of many years of hard work and advocacy from you and many others as well. So thank you for sharing about that. We'll now move to the next part of the discussion, and we have two wonderful speakers. We'll have first Dr. Alexandra Gusens-Ishii, who's the Program Coordinator for Environment, Climate Change and Biodiversity at Soka International. Alexandra is a dear colleague and friend, and she's one of the co-organizers of today's event and is also one of the co-conveners of the Faiths for Biodiversity Coalition. And she'll be talking about, and the following speaker, Alan, they'll both be speaking about how faith values can be brought into decision-making and project implementation for the GBF. Alex, it's great to see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gopal. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the previous speakers as well. It's really a wonderful opportunity to be able to celebrate the International Day of Indigenous People with bringing into dialogue, indigenous values and also now faith values. And one thing we wanted to share during this webinar is some concrete projects and implementation stories led by various faith groups and faith communities that the Faith for Biodiversity Coalition gathered over last year to share ahead of COP16 in Cali, and to really bring also in terms of implementation what faith groups are doing. This is a very, very small, I would say, a view of probably so many other projects, but that's already great to see what we could gather. And so you can find the full report on the website of the Faith for Biodiversity Coalition, which is biodiversity.faith. For now, I'm just going to go briefly into each region to just show you a little bit the scope of the type of projects that are implemented to really conserve, protect nature based on faith values, based on the relationship between people and the relationship between people and nature. So for Africa, there are several projects that you can see now on the slide, and they really vary. You have different faith taking the lead. And for instance, the first one on environmental education, led by Arosha, they really bring every year an annual conference of practitioners in Africa, where they will really share peer learning around conservation, biodiversity protection, waste management, but also using cost-effective, pollinator-friendly, biological ways to control pests in different of projects that they have. And so this will really have a ripple effect throughout the communities when this peer-to-peer exchange then happen, and the people go back to their communities, sharing these different practices and implementing them. In Asia, you also have several projects, also again throughout various faith communities. The one that's called Nurturing Nature is from the Bishnoi faith tradition, and we know that tradition as they are the original tree huggers as we know them. They have set various projects and foundations since then. The Nurturing Nature eco-restoration from the Bishnoi's perspective is one of them. And they have really done agroforestry, ecological restoration projects, emphasizing rainwater harvesting and rejuvenation. So it's also including a lot of collaboration between various entities, including indigenous peoples on the ground, faith-based organizations, and engaging youth in intergenerational dialogues. Then we have, for instance, in Europe, we also had several projects. One of them, the Sacred Spaces Nature Map, was an interfaith project between Christian and Muslim communities to really map their place where they live. So that was the Bolso Heath, as really not just a place of building and roads, but really a place of nature and wildlife. And this was really an interfaith cooperation initiative to really promote environmental awareness throughout the community, sharing this map, really engaging with people in urban settings as well. We have in Latin America, we had also several projects of conservation, restoration, really done in collaboration between various groups. So you can read more. I'm not going to go now into too many more details, but the same for the Middle East with projects really based on the Quran. Really trying to show specific values, faith values, and like to really embody them in projects. Finally, we also have North America and Oceania, which have also wonderful projects that you'll be able to read more in the reports around reweaving the connection between people and nature in very concrete terms. And so to conclude, all these projects, they have really several elements in common. So that strong community engagement and trying to really have inclusive participation amongst various groups. A lot of projects around education and awareness, grounded in ecosystem restoration and conservation vision, trying to really increase sustainable practices and resource management, but also trying to really advocate for better policies, for rights-based approaches, and really trying to do that in interfaith collaboration manner, and also beyond faith, actually various groups, and trying to engage various groups. My last point is to encourage you to submit if you have a project. We are now in a process in the Convention on Biological Diversity where we are looking at a collective progress report on how the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is being implemented. And very recently, submission for non-state actors, so it means all of us, all groups, faith groups included, and of course, Indigenous communities, and youth, women, so really non-state actors, civil society, can really report on the implementation of the KMGBF, and you can do so via the website. So you will get this presentation, and so you will get the links, but you can follow a template that really takes you through what you can submit as examples. But if you have case studies that you want to share, really do not hesitate to contribute also to this discussion and to showing what also faith values mean when they are implemented. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alex, for lifting up those wonderful case studies. We've put the link in the chat so folks can dive a bit more deeper into them, and also showing the call to submit case studies to the CBD, and that's something that Face for Biodiversity will be encouraging over the next month to 6 weeks as well. So thank you for that. Now I'd like to turn to my dear friend Alan Otoro. I also want to call Alan a doctor as well, so let's just make everyone a doctor today. So Dr. Alan Otoro is the founder and executive director of the Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa. Alan and I have been doing this work for many years together, but he, unlike myself, Alan is still a youth representative, and he brings a critical perspective on the importance of intergenerational equity and justice in the context of environmental protection. Alan, it's great to have you with us. I know you're regularly on the road, so it's great you've made some time for us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gopal, and hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you and to gain from the wealth of knowledge and wisdom that all our previous speakers have very elaborately, highlighted the topic that we are having a dialogue and conversation about today. So I just want to kind of narrow down to maybe just a couple of things that come to mind from listening to all the wonderful speakers we've had before, and then just zero in on the experience I've had with my colleagues at SINESA in terms of working with young people from a faith perspective in the biodiversity space, and particularly in the issues around policy making. Now, one of the first interesting experiences I had last year at the COP16 in Cali was going to a side event of young people, but indigenous youth from different places in Africa, from Botswana, from Namibia, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they were sharing their experiences of protecting biodiversity, but also of engaging with their communities, both within, as indigenous people, but also with the broader society. And this kind of brought to me the core of the fact that when we often speak of young people, we speak of them often as one homogeneous group. But that experience kind of, again, reminded me and highlighted to me the fact that, we have young people across different, spectrum, diverse spectrum of society. That is indigenous people, but also in the faith communities and in other civil society spaces, that we need to find ways of synergy and working together to move forward the global biodiversity framework agenda. And one of the experiences we've had with doing this is particularly the issue of building intergenerational dialogue. So in 2021, we were participating in the Nature Positive by 2030 campaign, and we had the idea to go to 5 different dioceses in Kenya, just to get highlights from young people, to hear from young people what their concerns are when it comes to biodiversity protection, what they have seen in their communities, particularly in their faith communities, and what more they think could be done to protect biodiversity. But the unique thing about this 5 dioceses project was that we were looking at biodiversity through the lens of the encyclical letter Laudato Si, because of course, for those of the Catholic tradition, Pope Francis wrote the encyclical letter 10 years ago, and so this year we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si. But he addressed this letter not only to people of faith, but to everybody living on the planet. So therefore, reminding everyone that young people demand change, and they wonder how anyone can claim to be building a better future without thinking of the environmental crisis and the sufferings of the excluded. And many times young people feel excluded from the policy-making spaces, but also from the spaces where important conversations, important dialogues are happening about both the present and the future. And so what we found as interesting was that even though in this fora that we organized across these 5 different dioceses, across different landscapes, from Malindi, for example, at the coast in Kenya, all the way to Nakuru, in kind of the Rift Valley Highlands, was that even though young people and their patrons and those who kind of guide them or act as faith leaders within their communities are also interested to come and hear, to come and participate, and to come and hear what the concerns of the young people are. For example, the use of land that is owned by dioceses or in their parishes. What could be done, or what programs could be done in that land to help preserve biodiversity within the context of those faith spaces where people come to worship and come to join together as communities of faith. The other thing that was very interesting was the issue of those who make decisions, even within the faith spaces themselves, are not often the young people, they're the older generation. And so the discussion was about how do we ensure that even as we talk about care for a common home, in this particular instance, protecting biodiversity, how do we facilitate young people to be at the center of decision making? And one of the things we were able to do later on was to participate in the creation or in the drafting of the implementation guidelines for Laudato Si within the 9 countries that form the Bishops' Conference for Eastern Africa. So the bishops in Eastern Africa have their association, which brings together all the national bishops' conferences in the 9 countries. And we were part of the drafting of that guideline for implementing Laudato Si across these 9 countries, ensuring that we invited the bishops as the faith leaders to make sure that young people at different levels, at the level of the small Christian community, at the parish level, but also at the diocesan and national level, are involved with the different agencies of the church that are involved in implementing care for a common home, and in this instance, protecting biodiversity. And what we found at the end is that there was a real hunger, not just by the young people, but also the elder generation, to share some of their own personal experiences, but also, to take responsibility, for the destruction, for the lack of care that we've seen, before, and therefore bringing that element of intergenerational justice. So the dialogue, intergenerational dialogue, that then opens the door to intergenerational justice, taking responsibility, and then committing to give and provide resources and the space for the young people to then take leadership in terms of protection of biodiversity, but also to deploy their own talents, their own skills, and the new tools that young people have in terms of care for a common home. Tools such as social media, which enables the sharing of information, but also building community among young people of different spheres of society, whether they are young people of faith, whether they are indigenous youth, and others, to work together in different frameworks and fora in advancing the global biodiversity framework agenda. So thanks everyone, and I look forward to listening to further thoughts about this conversation. Back to you, Gopal.
Thank you so much, Alan, for that and sharing some real practical examples there of modeling that intergenerational work that you do so well there in SciNESA. We're now moving to the last session for today, where we'll be breaking out into small groups to kind of further dive into this and further churn what are some of the values and the worldviews and ideas that we want to put forward as we look around implementing faith and values into protection of biodiversity within the context of the GBF. And in order to kind of prime us for that conversation in the breakout group, we have two very wonderful speakers that I'm very delighted to have today. The first is Dr. Christopher Ives, who's the Associate Professor at the University of Nottingham in the School of Geography. Dr. Ives explores the deeper dimensions of sustainability, such as values, beliefs, and worldviews, and the potential of religion to offer new perspectives on sustainability challenges. And he's going to share with us today a conceptual framework he has developed that can help us think through these big ideas. So Dr. Ives, such a pleasure to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gopal. And thank you, everybody, for joining this exciting webinar today. So as Mira began by outlining today the concept of values, what I'll do now is dig a little bit more deeply into the concept of religion or faith. And what I want to do is provide us with some precision, perhaps in the language and the ideas that we're using here that can help support the kind of conversations that we'll be having after this session. I think it's really important that we're clear about what we mean by religion, as that particularly can help us navigate some of the complexities and the fuzzy intersection between what it means to be Indigenous and what it means to be faith-based, which I think is at the heart of today. And I'm also going to look a little bit at how religion might be able to inform our understanding of value shift or change. And so in the values assessment back in 2022, we heard that societal goals will need to align more strongly with values such as justice, stewardship, unity, and responsibility, and that unleashing these kinds of latent values is really important for driving societal change. And yes, today we're here thinking about the role of religion in this potential societal shift. Next slide, please. So what is religion? We'll just spend a couple of slides thinking a little bit more about that. It's notoriously difficult to define. One definition I do like is one by Haluza Delay here, because it's quite broad and expansive. And so the definition is that religion includes beliefs, worldviews, practices, and institutions that cross borders, times, and scales, from individuals all the way to transnational and transhistorical movements. So you've got this expansiveness of scale that goes from individuals all the way out through to formal or even informal institutions. I do think it's important to remember, though, that whenever we talk about what is or isn't religion, it's a kind of act of power, because it makes a claim on whose voices are valid, who's included, who is said to speak on behalf of others. So I think that's really important for us to think about today in our conversations. And broadly, when we talk about how we define religion, we can think about our definitions as being quite inclusive, so focused on certain kinds of behaviors or functions of religion in society, or more exclusive, where we might become more precisely defining it more precisely based on what it is, or whether it's a certain particular tradition. Both are valid, but again, it's important that we're careful in the way that we use our language here. Next slide, please. So yes, different scholarly traditions approach religion in different ways, which can bring to the fore various different perspectives. And each of us might find ourselves aligned more or less with different ones of these. So we can think about religion or faith as an institution, both formal or informal, which is what we might do from the posture of political science or maybe economics. If you're thinking about it sociologically, we can think about religion as a kind of social field or a movement. In psychology, scholars tend to think about religion as one of the factors that explain the sorts of values that we have or behaviors that we engage in. In geography, my own discipline, we think about how religion is expressed in different ways and is fundamentally configured in different places, and is an expression of places and perhaps ecologies. Or we can think from an anthropological point of view about the role of religion in defining or characterizing different human cultures. And in a paper that I wrote with some colleagues recently, we drew out two key analytical axes, we call these, as dimensions to be aware of when we talk about religion. And so one is the social scale. So is religion fundamentally a personal phenomenon? Is this about how various different actors can authentically embody certain beliefs or values, or is it a kind of group phenomenon where beliefs, values, and worldviews are held and enacted collectively? And then secondly, which is important for when we think about religion, think about values and how they are formed and changed, is religion a stable phenomenon, or is it changeable? So is it formal? Is it codified within organizations, or is it a kind of malleable thing that we're trying to grapple with here? And so the perspective that we take informs the kinds of conversations that we'll have. Another concept that we often talk about, but needs to be thought about a little bit more deeply, is that of worldviews. And so today we're going to be thinking about how religious worldviews might be able to contribute to policy responses for biodiversity. Well, what do we mean by worldview? An approach that I've found really helpful in my own work is building on some of the work by a psychologist, Anneke Hedlund de Wit, who divided worldview up into 5 different dimensions. And I'll very quickly just touch on these here, again, because they can shape the sorts of conversations that we'll have. So one dimension of worldview is ontology. So what do we think the nature of reality is? And the religious examples that relate to biodiversity might include thinking about nature or biodiversity, or nature not necessarily as biodiversity, but as creation, or spiritually animated, or fundamentally sacred. A second dimension is epistemology, which is really about our theory of knowledge. How does knowledge come about? And so we can think about knowledge as potentially revealed in scripture, or as discerned spiritually within various different traditions. The third is axiology, or a dimension about values. What does it mean to live well? What is a good life? And here we might engage with ideas of virtue or wisdom, or living a life of compassion. Anthropology is about what we think about, what does it mean to be human? What is our concept of the human being? And here our identity from various different traditions might be fundamentally as stewards of nature, or counterproductively, sometimes seeing humanity as having dominion over biodiversity, or it could be about kinship or a community of creation. And then finally, our concept of a societal vision. What are we trying to achieve in society, or what should society look like? And this is where certain concepts like justice or equality comes in, or sometimes certain beliefs about eschatological beliefs about the end times as well are really important. So all of that, it's really complex and dense as a concept of worldview, but all of those dimensions are informed deeply by faith traditions. And so individuals, the way that they come to answering those worldview dimensions can really be shaped by various religious traditions. Thank you. A piece of work that I did recently with some colleagues, one of who I think Jeremy Kidwell is on the call as well here today, came out of the chapter 2 of the IPBES values assessment, which is thinking about how values are formed and changed. And the question we were asking is, what is the role of religion in forming and changing values? And I want to offer 3 domains or categories of processes that are important for understanding how values might be shaped by religion. Firstly is to think about personal processes. And so there's evidence within the literature of values shifting over time as people age, or through being formed through spiritual practices like meditation or contemplation or prayer even. Or it can be through personal encounters or spiritual experiences that help establish or embed certain kinds of values. We can think also about social processes, so values being formed and shaped by traditions within families and the family unit, so how those values get passed on through generations. or through religious education or schooling. We can think about at a societal level, the flow of people in and out, immigration and emigration, perhaps in response to planetary pressures that we're experiencing. We can think about religious institutions greening, emphasizing certain kinds of ecological ethics, and Laudato Si would be a good example of that occurring within the Catholic tradition. Or we can talk about how nature might be incorporated within shared religious practices within groups. And then finally, a category of value formation and change can be more than human processes. So this is a concept that looks at entities outside of humans as shaping the kinds of values that we hold or we express as people. And so this might be encounters with other living beings, a kind of spiritual experience. It might be about understanding value fundamentally in relationship to the divine, or nature as having a spiritual quality to it, a kind of sacredness. And there's overlaps between all these categories, but again, I offer this as a framework that can potentially guide the conversations that we have today. So to just very quickly recap, to finish, I think it's important to recognize that there's multiple different processes by which religion is formed, or forms and shapes the values of nature, to recognize that values of nature are intertwined with religious worldviews in lots of complex ways. And what we think about religion, particularly whether it's a stable or a changeable phenomenon, or whether it's fundamentally a personal or individual expression, or if it's held collectively, shapes how we answer questions of how faith can engage with this biodiversity crisis. So thank you very much for the time that we've had here to share these thoughts. And I offer the floor back to you, Gopal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christopher. Great, amazing presentation, and really sets the stage for the breakout we'll be having shortly. There's a question, I think, for you in the chat, if you'd like to respond to that. Unfortunately, we won't have time for Q&A at this point. But I would like to now introduce our final speaker before we go into our breakout rooms, and that is Harris Teddens, who's recently published a really interesting book called Nature as a Value Standard, 3 Measures for Creating Monetary System that Protects the Foundations of Our Existence. And I think one reason we wanted Harris on the call today is really because so much of the destruction we see in the natural world is because of our economic systems going back probably about 200 years or so. And so to really understand where the root cause of this is from the economic modeling we have is really foundational to restoring the balance and the abundance of nature. So Harris, wonderful to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the enormous opportunity to speak for such a concentration of specialists about the preservation of biodiversity, the protection of the nature that has brought us as humankind to existence. Next slide, please. In the context of Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, it is stated, the current biodiversity crisis is rooted in a historically narrow and instrumental view of nature, one that has encouraged its overexploitation for financial gain. What financial is, we know. Financial is the way how we use money. But what is money? To make the conclusion very clear from the beginning, we can and must make nature as a value standard for the monetary system. The religious organizations of the world are probably the only power that should and can have the moral ambition to make this come true. Faith cannot subordinate themselves to a belief and acceptance of money as the first force. That would be a money faith. Let me explain the challenge. More than 60% of mankind lives in urban settlements or post-urban settlements like villages that depend on industrial agriculture, etc. The number is rising. What is the core system of this urban and post-urban society? That is the money system. Without the monetary system, there's more than 60% of mankind would break down in disaster. Given this all-dominating character, it is astonishing that most people are not aware of two main properties of the monetary system. One, the so-called value of money is only calculated out of the existing and expected prices of goods and services. So, the monetary system is a mathematical echo chamber only concerned with itself and completely disconnected from nature. 2. When people buy something, they do not only acquire by the spending of their money the respective goods and services. At the same time, they shift away the responsibility of how these goods and services come into being to the producers. This systematically distances people, companies, and organizations from the environmental and social impacts of their actions. To put it more straight, the using of money as an intermediate medium of exchange is the systematic eschewing or shifting away of responsibility. So it's disconnected from nature, and it is a systematic shifting away of responsibility, the use of money. Next slide, please. 3 relatively simple initial measures can ensure that the monetary system will become subordinate to nature rather than the reverse. 1. A system of tradable annual certificates should be established for the world remaining intact natural areas. This should begin with the pristine forests, mangroves, and moors, and their alongside areas. Each certificate would represent 4 square kilometers of pristine natural area. 2. The current monetary system should then be linked to this system of these yearly certificates. Commercial banks would be required not only to deposit money for their compulsory reserves with the central banks as they do now, but also to deposit a certain amount of these certificates. If the global area of pristine natural spaces continue to decrease, money will just become more expensive. If it increases, the money supply and consequently the economy may grow. 3. However, this approach will only succeed if the financial sector addresses the following concerns. 1. Protecting intact pristine natural areas such as primeval forests, moors, and mangroves, and 2. Supporting their indigenous peoples, local communities that depend on them. They must do so to the extent that it financially will be no longer attractive to destroy these areas and with that biodiversity. To put it more bluntly, the financial support for protecting these areas and the money for the development of nature-based solutions in the areas surrounding them will locally bring more money than for their destruction. Only that will work. So
Dr. Harris?
it is.
Thank
Yes.
you. Apologies to interrupt, but if I may send a quick time check over, we do need to move into the breakout room discussions now. Would you be able to conclude in 10 seconds?
Okay.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Only if the religious communities can and should reflect on their ethical teachings, we cannot accept a usury on the nature. It is nice when the Abrahamic religions talk about usury, for instance, which is socially, but that makes no sense if we destroy the nature. That's why we can start with the euro and apply these two, three measures. And the one who want to know this, then please look at the next slide, where you can find all the further information. A new monetary system with nature as value standard. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Harris, for that and for the link for your book. And please do put it in the chat so if people can find where to find it. We're now going to break out into 3 breakout rooms, all of which will be answering the same questions. They are on your screen now, and the moderators will be ready to share them with you. And the essence is, how do our faith traditions think about and act when it comes to relating with nature? And how can this work be shaped and informed leading up to COP17 next year? And so I'd like to ask the tech team behind the scenes if they can initiate the breakouts so we can go into those conversations for the next 10 minutes or so. Thank you.
The breakout rooms are open. You should be moved to them automatically. Camelia, does it seem like people are being moved to the breakout rooms? No.
No, there's no message to join them.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. On the upper ribbon,
Yes.
there's if you click on rooms, you can join a room, and there's only 2. So I guess we have to do manually.
No? Okay.
I don't see rooms in my Teams.
I also don't see rooms.
I would like to be moved to the third one.
Okay.
All rooms answer to the same questions.
Okay, then move me to one. I'm fine. I can't see it here.
Asmira, is there any way that you can do it automatically?
Yes. Okay, people should be moving now. Okay, if there's anyone that has not been assigned a room.
I have not been assigned.
Yes, give it 2 seconds.
Okay.
Yes, I'm here, unless this is the room.
Oh, well, are we in a room? I'm not aware of that.
That's what I'm wondering, where this is the room that we've been allocated for us.
Okay. Probably I'm in a room. Okay.
Rita, McDonald, Mehdi, do you not have a room?
Thank you all. Sorry for all the kind of jumping around, let's say. I think we're all back. Just checking with my colleagues, Ismaira, Camelia, are we all back? All present? Okay, great. We are over time now, so what we'll do is we'll give a quick 1-minute wrap up from each of the breakout groups, and then a couple of remarks in terms of follow up. If my colleague Alex is still here, if Alex wants to share a quick 1-minute summary of what was discussed in her group. Oh, I don't see Alex. Okay. All right, that's fine. We'll keep moving on. In our group, we had a couple of interventions focused around a number of different topics around just recognizing the importance of that nature is life, and how in the African context there's a real kind of pivot trying to move back to indigenous traditions and trying to align indigenous traditions with Christianity and Islam, which was really fascinating to hear. A remark around monitoring and evaluation, not just around outcomes, but also how entanglement with nature is, I think, is the phrase that Dr. Ives used. Thinking about diversity of rituals around nature was also mentioned as well. And a barrier that was mentioned, I think, a lot of us kind of resonated with, is that oftentimes faith is not kind of it's difficult to bring up faith in institutionalized spaces. And so how do we bring up values and faith in a kind of more kind of palatable way? And one example that was shared was like, rather than talking about water, bringing actually some water to an event, or bringing an object to an event, and why that has meaning for us, rather than just talking about faith and values in the abstract. So those are some of the things that came up in our group. Alex, would you care to share just a 45-second overview of some of the key takeaways from your group?
Yes, thank you so much. So we also had short but really great points. Some points around how in some so some people sharing from their own faith traditions, sharing really how about diversity of perspectives is actually our strength. And recognizing really the bridging efforts that many indigenous peoples and communities have done around values, and so recognizing that shared effort that needs to continue. And so both recognizing diversity, but also maybe the value into looking into the oneness also of what brings us together as humanity and nature. And then also in terms of obstacles and barriers, we see some problematic practices from really the Western tradition into indigenous peoples' communities around land use, land grabbing, but then bringing in the government, and so leading to a disenfranchisement of indigenous peoples' communities. And so that was like a warning for faith groups to maybe also be careful not to reproduce some of these practices potentially when it comes to land use in the land of indigenous peoples. And basically that really faith plays a major role for many people, but ultimately it's also down to the individuals. And so at the end of the day, that policy will be implemented and put forward. So we really need to bring these values back to individuals. And for instance, court cases, like all the work that is being done also with lawyers to really bring government and companies to be accountable is very important as well in there.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you so much for all of you who have joined us today. And thank you to all of our speakers. I won't go through each of them individually, but very, very grateful for all of their contributions today. And our apologies for running a little bit over and for the technical hiccups we had as well. In terms of next steps, we will be sending out a follow-up email with some of the key links that was shared and some of the key points in the presentation as well. And then there are a number of key moments, in the near future and over the next year leading up to COP17. Obviously, we have Climate Week happening here in New York in about, 6 weeks' time. We have UNEA 7 happening end of the year, I think. And then next year we have the CBD COP and also the Biodiversity COP and the CCD COPs as well next year. So there are a number of key moments over the next 12 plus months leading up to COP17. And Face for Biodiversity and the UNEP Faith for Earth team are very keen to keep this conversation going. This is very much a starter for this conversation on how faith and Indigenous values can be complementary and aligned in order to support the goals of the GBF. So please, if you're not already on our mailing lists, we will send out details in the follow-up email about how to join the mailing lists so that we can stay connected for this work. And we look forward to continuing this conversation in the weeks and months ahead up to COP17 next year. Thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you a good rest of your day.
Thank you.